This is Dr. Jerome Corsi, and today it's Wednesday. It's November 22nd, 2023. Today is the 60th anniversary of the JFK assassination. I was 17 years old and in high school when Jack Kennedy was killed. That day I remember vividly, and it was a shock. I mean, he was young, vital president, and cut down in Dallas. I think it fundamentally was the day America changed, when we went from a country that was aspiring to achieve good. Maybe we were naive at the time, but I think the CIA has been architecting our reality since perhaps it was created. And I think President Truman, who wrote an editorial right after JFK was assassinated, suggested that even though he'd created the CIA, he was in favor of disbanding it or at least restricting its activities. And today that could be it's more important than ever. CIA is, I think, in charge of the media, is crafting narratives, is creating crisis after crisis after crisis. It's an attempt to manipulate the American people. I will have a book out with Dr. David Mantik. We're in the final stages of copy editing on the JFK assassination. And I think it's going to be a book that will shock the nation. We'll say more about it as we get closer to publication. But today I am remembering 60 years ago and looking at what we've gone through with the Vietnam War, which I think would never have happened. Jack Kennedy was not going to fight in the Vietnam War. He had been to Southeast Asia. He knew how corrupt it was. He despised French colonialism and did not want us to become the followers in Vietnam, Indochina at that time, from the French who had been defeated at Dien Bien Phu in 1954. President Eisenhower refused to come to their aid, and we should have, at that time, abandoned Vietnam, which was a losing war. But the CIA wanted to have another big investment for the military-industrial complex, and military-industrial complex is still conducting wars in order to enrich the arms manufacturers. Wars don't solve anything. Wars just lay the seed for the next war. They aren't a solution. Wars are the problem. We need to come to a vision that John Kennedy had, that we could live in peace with others. The United Nations is not a way to resolve problems. It's just gotten taken over by a group of anti-American countries that are largely dominated by globalism and communism. Communism has reached a frightening level in the Democratic Party, which I think has become a communist, neo-Marxist party, conducting a cultural revolution, a Maoist cultural revolution in the United States. That's my second book in this Great Awakening series. So we'll be talking a great deal more about Jack Kennedy. I'll be creating a Substack in 2024. And thank you for joining us on The Truth Central. Let's get into the first story today. The first story is about Israel and Hamas. They've reached a truce to release 50 hostages. Now, there's a lot of backstory to this, which is that from the moment that Hamas attacked Israel, Israel was bound to retaliate. And the world immediately braced to try to stop Israel and try to limit Israel's ability to wage war, which is constantly the case. So immediately the narrative shifted to how many civilians Israel was going to kill and attacking Hamas in Palestine in the Gaza Strip. This Gaza Strip has been controlled by the Palestinian Authority, then now by Hamas, as is the West Bank controlled by Hamas. Hamas is a terrorist organization, a Sunni terrorist organization, which is committed to destroy Israel. Israel has been going leftist for a long time. The population has been disarmed. That's why these attacks were so vicious and successful, because the Israelis had no way to fight back. Now, the Israeli cabinet approved a truce, and Hamas has agreed to release 50 civilian hostages. They have like 250 hostages, so Hamas is doing a limited release of hostages, but they will now gain time to regroup in the southern part of the Gaza Strip before Israel launches an offensive to out Hamas from the Gaza Strip altogether. What all this indicates is that the war is going to be prolonged, going to go on likely for months, and this deal is going to be carried out in two phases. In the first, 30 children, 8 mothers, and 12 other women will be released over 4 days, when all ground and military operations will be put on hold across the entire Gaza Strip. First hostages could be freed as early as tomorrow, which is Thanksgiving. In exchange, Israel will release 150 Palestinian men and women and minors held in Israeli prisons. Now, many of those were rounded up in various fighting, throwing rocks, etc. They are not all Hamas. In the second phase, up to 30 hostages would be released over a 3-day period. In that same phase, non-Israeli hostages would be freed. So, ahead of the announcement, President Netanyahu said that Israel will continue to fight the war against Hamas despite the pauses. Israel will continue the war in order to return all the hostages, to complete the elimination of Hamas, and to ensure there will be no renewed threat from Gaza to the state of Israel. So the airstrikes on Gaza continued through the early hours of today, Wednesday, and in certain neighborhoods in the Gaza City were hit by Israeli air. The Israelis are trying to completely oust Hamas from Gaza City in the north. This war will shift. The pauses were celebrated by the Biden administration and were negotiated partly with Qatar and Egypt being in the deal. I think this is going to just be another phase of trying to slow this offensive down. Israel is also very concerned about the northern part of Israel, where Hezbollah is massed on the border and could easily launch attacks on the Israelis in the northern part of Israel. Syria is also involved. Syria is right by the Golan Heights. You can stand in the Golan Heights in northern Israel and look down on Damascus. I've done it. I've been there. And it's right now a very dangerous stage. The pause is probably a good idea for everybody to cool off, and the Israelis will also take more time to plan what they're going to do in the southern part of Gaza. But the war is not going to end here. And the issue remains whether or not it'll go regional. And I see here the potential for this war to easily expand. It will only take 1 or 2 incidents to force the war into Lebanon. And every time Israel gets into this situation, over a period of time, international pressure mounts for Israel to stop the attacks. This is not a solution. It may buy Israel some more time of security until Hamas can regroup or a new strategy from Iran can be decided upon in order to try to eliminate the state of Israel. But as I see it, as the United States is withdrawing from the Middle East, certainly with the Biden administration taking us out of Afghanistan and leaving all this military equipment there for the terrorists to pick up and use against us. John Kerry started this process with the Obama administration and giving a deal to Iran, which provided a huge amount of money, some of it flown in cash by Air Force planes to Iran. And the deal was essentially that Iran could develop a nuclear weapon, just not on Obama's term of office. And now Biden seems to be doing the same thing, paying off Iran in order to push out in time the development of a nuclear weapon. Eventually, Iran will have a nuclear weapon. Eventually, will be at the threat existentially that Iran will use it, those nuclear weapons to try to destroy Israel. We're just in a countdown to those days, and we continuously kick it down the road a bit. But the fundamental resolution of the situation in the Middle East is not going to happen until the Muslim nations decide that they're going to accept the existence of Israel. If the existence of Israel is not accepted by countries like Iran, more wars and more intense wars are inevitable. So this is an unsolvable problem at the moment, as long as Iran and other forces in the Middle East remain dedicated to the destruction of Israel. Right now, in the United Nations, Israel is being blamed for genocide against the Palestinians. Palestinians have been a problem wherever they've been. They were thrown out of Egypt, Jordan, and Lebanon because in each instance, the Palestinian Liberation Army, which is a radical Marxist group, wanted to overthrow the governments of the countries that were housing them. And the only place left for the Palestinians and the PLO is the Sinai Desert. Egypt is not going to accept Palestinians, and it now is preventing the Palestinians from entering Egypt. Egypt does not want them. We've got a massive refugee problem all through Europe. It is not reported much in the United States, but the attacks on French churches have intensified. Almost every day, there's 3 or 4 churches which are vandalized, burned, desecrated. The influx of Muslims into Europe has fundamentally changed the demographic composition of Europe. And we now have, again, a group of radicals among these Muslims who are determined to eliminate Christianity. Christians are being persecuted all over the Middle East, and again, it's not largely being reported. I want to shift to another story, which I think is, again, intensifying what's going on in Europe. I think Europe is in much disarray right now, but the German Constitutional Court, the High Court in Germany, just made a decision that Germany wanted to move something like 60 billion euro from unused pandemic funds in 2021 into an energy and climate fund. And it renamed the Climate and Transformation. We're going to transition to wind and solar. This was deemed unconstitutional by the German government. The German Constitutional Court ruled it unconstitutional because Germany has a brake imposed through their governmental structure on how much debt they can incur. Now, what the court has said is that German government is now have public spending frozen for the rest of the year. Now, this is going to be a large blow to Europe's recovery efforts. Germany is going to be cut off from putting more money in Zelensky's bank account in Ukraine. In other words, Germany is not going to be providing more military aid to Ukraine. And the court decision is going to widen the economic gap between Europe, whose economy has been stagnated for over a year, and the U.S. We had a reported 5% growth in the first 3 months through September. Again, I think our growth numbers will be revised downward. But what's happening is that if Germany can't surplus spend, then this flood of spending they've done on green energy projects and technology has eaten up money that otherwise might have been allocated towards economic development or helping people with the increased energy costs in Europe because of the Russian cutoff of natural gas in retaliation for the sanctions that the EU imposed on Russia for invading Ukraine. So the Wall Street Journal is even noting that energy prices are expected to remain permanently above the pre-Ukraine war levels. Of course, that's going to benefit the U.S. exporters of liquid natural gas and the Biden regime, which has moved in quietly to kind of monopolize the trade route for natural gas going into Europe. It's going to squeeze out energy massive manufacturing, and an aging population and labor force is going to be projected to shrink and largely constrain potential growth. So Berlin's decision to freeze all federal spending for the rest of the year after the court defunded the government's $60 billion transfer of pandemic money to the green energy projects. Berlin has said that the government is not able to repurpose any of these unspent funds originally earmarked for tackle COVID to fund environmental and energy projects. So therefore, this cap on how much debt Germany can incur is going to put Germany more into a period of stagflation. The government's going to have to decide which policy arena, from boosting Europe's collective defenses to support Ukraine, or cushioning the impact of surging energy prices as a result of the Green New Deal, and dealing with inflation on businesses and households. Europe is in a bind. Germany especially is in a bind, and Germany is Europe's largest economy. Now, this is most certainly going to begin the process of a credit crunch. You're going to find, again, foreclosures probably in housing and certainly in subprime markets, including automobiles, commercial real estate. Banks around the world are over leveraged with credit, and the central governments are spending money at a historically unsustainable pace. This is going to cause a crash. We're inevitably going to see a downturn because of this. Now, I'm encouraging everybody to get prepared for a massive downturn. And what it's going to mean is we're going to see an increase in gold prices. I want you to get a copy of this free book. The coming global crash will create an historic gold rush. Okay, because the economics are developing right now. You can get a free book by calling Swiss America, toll-free number, 1-800-519-6268. Free copy will be sent to you of how the coming global crash will create an historic gold rush. We're going through both what happened in the 1970s when we had the Yom Kippur War and it began the OPEC oil embargo. We went through a period of stagflation when Jimmy Carter could not reverse these trends. And through Jimmy Carter's presidency, he was putting on a cardigan and broadcasting from the White House saying we all needed to turn on our thermostats because we were running out of oil. Well, again, oil is not a fossil fuel and we're not running out. But when Ronald Reagan took over, the gold was at $843 an ounce, up from $35 an ounce in 1971 when Richard Nixon took us off the gold standard. Richard Nixon at that time was trying to finance the Vietnam War and maintain Lyndon Johnson's Great Society social welfare programs. Then in 2008, 2009, with the subprime market, real estate crashing, and we've got both problems today. Green New Deal has caused a manufactured problem in energy, raising prices because this shift to green energies, wind and solar, is not going to be easy. It's not going to be quick. It's not going to be fun. These energies are not nearly as powerful. And again, the grid system is not equipped to make this transition. It's being ideologically implemented. It's not being implemented because of sound science or real climate science or economic rationality. So in the wake of all of the subprime real estate bubble bursting in 2008, 2009, gold went to $1,426 an ounce. COVID hit an all-time high on March 8th, 2022 of $2,074.60. You call Swiss America, you can also get this Walking Liberty half dollar, which is largely silver content, almost pure silver. And it's being offered as a one-time only. And Crystal will show the offer. It's on the True Central website under sponsors. Go to Swiss America, and you'll see this offer for the Walking Liberty half dollars. What you do is you fill out the form, and for one time, you can buy up to 250 of these coins. Chris will show you going to sponsors. You click that, go down to Swiss America, and you'll find there the Walking Liberty half dollar offer. Fill that out, and you can buy up to 250 of these coins at virtually what they're worth in silver today, and begin talking to Swiss America about the potential of investing in gold and silver, which you should do with some of your currency, which just for the hedging against the diminishing purchasing power of the dollar, which is almost certain to continue. When you go to the grocery store with $100, measure what you get today with what you got 2 years ago or pre-pandemic, and you're going to see the impact of inflation. It may not show up in government statistics, but it will show up with $100 in a grocery store, I guarantee you. Last time, the number for getting this free book is on the website. And just take a look at it. It's 1-800-519-6268, 1-800-519-6268. Call Swiss America, get a free copy of the book, and understand more completely what the economics are that today are going to drive the world eventually into a massive slowdown. Chris, I'm going to ask you to comment after the next story, so you might get ready. And what we're going to cover now some stories on the climate, which I think are additionally pretty interesting developments. But we're going to end this program with looking at some of the climate insanity that's going on. But I first want to cover a story about Finland. Now, what is happening in the EU and the United States, Ukraine's dropped off the news. So the CIA's decided that Ukraine's no longer the top story, so they stopped pumping stories to the journalists who are writing CIA propaganda, which is the mainstream media. And by the way, it ties into today's theme on JFK's assassination, because I am completely convinced that the CIA was responsible for Jack Kennedy's assassination and the cover-up. And I think this new book we're going to come out with here in a few weeks is going to be shocking on that regard, with the evidence that we're going to produce. Right now we have the NATO saying they're going to shift. They're getting Finland, which is now a NATO member, to close the entirety of their joint border with Russia. So if you take a look at that map, the old border really only covers the southern part of Finland. The new border is going to cover all of Finland. And Russia is going to perceive this as a threat to block it from access to the Atlantic through the north. You've got to realize that you're dealing here with a subarctic region of the Earth, very cold. And through Finland, you can get out into the Atlantic. Finland's been a hotly contested issue going back hundreds of years with Russia. In 1939, when Hitler and Stalin made a non-aggression pact, Russia moved into the Ukraine and the Finland, trying to capture territory. They also moved into Poland. They wanted to have at least half of Poland under Russia control. These are nation-state issues. Nation-states in geopolitics like to have buffer areas and like to be able to have control over their sphere of influence. And there's several things that are being telegraphed by this story. Number one, it's obvious that the pressure is intensifying on Zelenko to negotiate, because he's not going to get funded the way he has been funded. So the theft of U.S. and Europe money pouring into Ukraine is about to come to an end. I believe the Zelensky bank accounts and the bank accounts of his cronies have been filled about as much as they're going to get filled. The counteroffensive failed massively. Ukraine does not have the army. The army is not trained. It has taken huge losses. Russia's in massive defensive positions. I think Russia will want to take Kiev and Odessa on the Black Sea. But when Russia achieves those two goals, I think Russia will just hold on to the territory it's gotten in Ukraine, which would be taking about 2/3 of the Ukraine back under former Soviet influence, under Russian influence. It would leave just the northwestern part of Ukraine, which has always been aligned with Germany, still neo-Nazi brigades fighting for Zelensky. And it goes back to 2013, when the State Department and Soros funded the Maidan rebellion, which overthrew Yanukovych, who was a duly elected president of Ukraine, favorable to Moscow. NATO is pushing the envelope to confront Russia. And these, again, are ridiculous policies, because it intensifies global tensions rather than reduces them. And the idea that NATO needs to be expanded, I think NATO needs to be disbanded. I'm not sure there's any longer a strategic need for it. But certainly the European nations are not funding NATO the way they did fund it. And the U.S. military is increasingly more able to run a transgender parade down Fifth Avenue than it is to fight a war. We abandoned all that military equipment. I mean, our military command, the White House is a mess. Biden appears to be in senior dementia. We don't know who's in control. And these policies seemed aimed at causing war and economic destruction. It's as if, and I believe it is intended, the neo-Marxists in charge of the global agenda want to destroy the modern economies, want to destroy capitalism because they feel they have to destroy in order to create their utopia. Their utopia will be a dystopia because the Bill Gateses and the World Economic Forum will think they can be the oligarchs, have all the resources of the earth, and depopulate the rest of us. They don't need people. They can have their machines, their transhuman mixtures of humans merged with AI computers. We can be superhumans. Again, this is a age-old bad idea because it eliminates God from the equation and thinks we can perfect our life on earth. Our life on earth is not here to be perfected. Human beings are a flawed species. That's obvious biblically. And Satan's always telling us, just eat the forbidden fruit, and you can know what God knows, and we can perfect this place. Perfect it with war, starvation, mass killings, disease, and economic destruction. That's what Satan offers, and that's what the neo-Marxist left is going to deliver. And that's the book I've written here on the truth about neo-Marxism, cultural Maoism, and anarchy. It's the second book in this, what I'm calling Great Awakening Trilogy. It's not necessarily an easy read, but if you want to understand what's going on, understand how this neo-Marxism is what we're experiencing. We're going through a cultural revolution. Please take the time to study this book, because you'll find out that the radical left lives in a different psychological reality that magnifies schizophrenia. Whatever gender you think you are, we all have to accept, regardless of how insane it is, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Everything's racism. These are crafted messages, narratives that are designed to be destructive. They are the Hegelian dialectic at work, and if you don't understand it, we won't be able to combat it. Chris, you want to comment?
Looking at NATO, what is the use anymore? I understand that NATO nations did help us out in the 20-year Afghanistan war. The idea is, of course, one nation gets attacked, the rest of us gets attacked. We may or may not have a common enemy when it comes to terrorist organizations. Having said that, though, if we have a NATO and the NATO nations argue it has not outlived its usefulness, why are we using it for provocation rather than defense? That's an issue I have.
Well, again, these things need to be rethought from time to time. In other words, the configuration at post-World War was that Russia was taking territory in Europe, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Poland, and turning them into communist states. And the concern was that the communism would spread across Europe. Italy was at Spain. Other countries were heavily influenced, France, by neo-Marxist thinking. And NATO was created in order to contain the Soviet Union at that time, which was a strategy that George Kennan, State Department, had created in order to avoid a nuclear war, but yet contain the Soviet Union. Henry Kissinger rose that period of time with a book called The Necessity for Choice, in which he'd argued that massive nuclear retaliation as our only safeguard against Russia's expansion was not adequate, that we needed to have troops as well in order to fight limited conflicts. And that's really spurred the development of NATO. I don't think today Russia's goals are to sweep across Europe. I think essentially that Putin wants to establish Russia as a major geopower and does want to return to what was the Russian Federation, and wants to contain and preserve his access to the Atlantic through both Finland and Ukraine. But I don't see that it's going to be the same set of ambitions that Stalin had at the end of World War II. We've got to reevaluate that in terms of realistic geopolitics. Chris, I want to ask you back in a minute. At the end, I want to cover a couple of these global warming stories. Let's get ready. I do want to play that clip before we resolve on one of the top genuine climate scientists commenting on the global climate movement, this craze against the climate change attacking carbon dioxide. Now, a story is beginning to circulate that in this upcoming global climate change summit in Dubai, it's called COP28, after these Copenhagen meetings. Again, the United States and France are going to push for a agreement among these nations to end private financing for coal-fired plants. Now, this is insane because India and China are opposed to halt financing on coal because they rely upon coal for power generation. Coal generates about 70% of India's electricity, and India is boosting coal production while China continues to approve the construction of coal-fired plants. China actually has the largest Fischer-Tropsch plant in the world, which is using the formulas the German chemists developed in the Weimar Republic that shows how oil is synthesized. Oil is not fossil fuel. There is no fossil ever made a barrel of oil. These are natural processes in the mantle of the earth that combine hydrogen and carbon and a catalytic conversion, the presence of a catalyst like iron ore, high temperature and high heat, and it produces hydrocarbon chains. There's no magic incantation in which you throw in dinosaur parts and you get oil. The phasing out of coal in India and China is going to take 2 to 3 decades or more, when you realize that unless you want to starve millions of people and deny them electricity, put them in darkness, which I think the World Economic Forum would be happy to do. Too many people. So let's reduce our ability to generate energy and certainly demonize carbon dioxide. Thereby, we eliminate any of these various, like nitrogen, so we don't have fertilizer. And like in Sri Lanka, people starve. The goal here, and it's hard to get your mind around it, but the goal here is to create war, to create economic catastrophes, to create pandemics, to kill people, to destroy capitalism. That's the agenda underlying the climate change movement. And it is powerful in terms of its narrative because people don't know the science. Now, the last story I want to cover today is the story there's a very good, the Epic Times, which I recommend. And the Epic Times has a series of videos on Epic TV, which do thought leaders. And this series is extremely good. Richard Lindzen today is being interviewed in the American Thought Leaders. And this is a very good series of programs that the Epic Times and Epic TV run. I encourage people to watch it. Now, we're just going to play the trailer from it. This is Richard Lindzen, who is a MIT emeritus professor. And Richard Lindzen, this gentleman you're going to see in a minute, commented on my book, The Truth About Energy, Global Warming, and Climate Change. It's exposing climate lies in an age of disinformation, which is what we are in. CIA created disinformation and lies. I want to read you what Richard Lindzen said about my book. He said, Corsi produces an eye-opening history of the contextual background for the hysteria accompanying climate change. In other words, I go into showing how this was a neo-Marxist movement, and it was aimed at getting global government. So, eye-opening history of the contextual background for the hysteria accompanying climate change, as well as descriptions of a wide range of thinking about the history of the planet, thinking that illustrates both the insights and fallibility of the scientific enterprise. In other words, I'm proposing that oil, coal, natural gas are abiotic in origin. I talk about the disappearance of the dinosaurs being in part caused by an expanding Earth. I challenge the continental shift argument that is accepted, saying the Earth expanded and the increase in gravity as a result of the increase in mass of the Earth as part of its expansion. meant that the dinosaurs were too big to function in a more intense gravitational field. These are ideas which, again, Richard Lindzen liked because they show that science is always challenging. There's no fixed science. Lindzen, in this broadcast, makes the distinction between science and the science. He says it's when politicians get involved and they see that they can use a science as a club. They want to say the science as if that were everybody's agreed and it was firmly established. And for the left, they just mean that this is what the utopian vision is, that we quit using hydrocarbon fuels and that we demonize carbon dioxide, which we exhale. And so fundamentally, this entire movement is anti-people, as if people are the blight of the earth. We are causing damage to the earth. There's too many of us. The best way to preserve earth for the few who deserve to live, the Bill Gateses of the world who want to think they're worthy and the rest of us are not of life, want to demonize human beings, and carbon dioxide is one way they do it. So, Chris, if we can play that clip for a minute, I'd like to show people the trailer, and I'd like to encourage people to watch this entire program. Go ahead.
The minute you hear the science is settled, you know something is wrong.
Today I sit down with Richard Lindzen, an atmospheric physicist and professor emeritus of meteorology at MIT.
I mean, CO2, they forget, is, essential. We're treating it as a poison. If you could get rid of 60% of the CO2, or roughly, we'd all be dead.
What are the so-called climate experts getting wrong? What has been the impact of our climate policies?
You have cattle raisers in Ireland all going under, starvation in Sri Lanka. And you see, these policies have had no impact on CO2. They have done nothing to prevent this alleged existential threat except make people poorer, make society less stable, less resilient. And you can only account for that with either ignorance or sadism.
Don't forget to subscribe to our Alerts newsletter, and you'll never miss an episode.
I encourage people to do this. I think the Epoch Times is doing a good job. I think their videos are worth watching. And Jan here has done a great job in bringing together thought leaders. So again, the Epoch Times, Epoch TV, this Richard Lindzen clips are part of an hour, more than an hour presentation in which he really gives you a comprehensive idea of how complex climate science truly is. Okay, let's wrap it up. Chris, any final comments before we wrap up today? Tomorrow is Thanksgiving, and we're going to take a break until Monday. We'll be back on Monday, and I want to wish everyone a blessed Thanksgiving.
Yes, happy Thanksgiving, everybody. And yes, I note that you put the distinction together between real science and the science.
Right.
The science. Follow the science. That makes people. It's sort of a Pavlovian trigger word for people on the left, or people who are, let's say, as Hillary Clinton would have put it, low information voters. A lot of these buzzwords are Pavlovian, but science versus the science. It's, as you know, science involves the scientific method. The science involves what some talking heads say and makes you feel good.
It's a narrative. It's a CIA constructed narrative that you've got to believe and bow down to. Look, the C.S. Lewis called it scientism, and he warned that scientism would become the new religion, and it has. C.S. Lewis is very much worth listening to and watching on this clips and reading. Yes, get a copy of this free book. Again, got a few days here before we'll be back. 1-800-519-6268. Talk to Swiss America. People are saying I'm looking younger. Take a look at our sponsors, the My Vital C. I'm 77 years old. I've decided not to retire. There's too much going on now, and I'm becoming very active again, writing books and doing this podcast. That book, I think you'll find illuminating and really understanding the global crisis that's being consciously created by the forces of evil that want to destroy capitalism. In the end, God will always win. God will win here too. With Thanksgiving coming, we should all include in our Thanksgiving observances 2 Chronicles 7:14. We should take time to get down on our knees and ask God's forgiveness for getting to this dark place. For allowing God to be taken out of the schools with Supreme Court decisions going back to the 1940s, Roe v. Wade having millions of babies chopped to pieces in the womb, These are serious violations of God's law. We will go through the judgment of God. We are beginning to go through it. It will be severe. God wins always because God created this place. This place obeys God's law. It's a spiritual place, and God can shut it down, unplug it anytime God wants to. We're not meant to live forever. We're not meant to be superhuman. We are meant to honor and serve God with our lives. We're here for God's purposes, not for our own. At the end, I believe that God did not create the human race to fail. And as more of us, I take the story of Abraham and Sodom and Gomorrah, when Abraham bargained with God, how many people will you need to be just in order to save the city? And God kept reducing the number. I think the point of the Abraham story is it takes one. If Abraham found one just person in Sodom and Gomorrah, God might have saved it. In other words, one person can change the world. And each of you out there can be that one person. Dr. Jerome Corsi, today is the 60th anniversary of John Kennedy's assassination, November 22nd, 2023. Thank you for joining us. We'll be back on Monday. We're going to take this holiday to observe it and pray and hopefully enjoy family. And thank God for allowing us to be here. TheTruthCentral.com. Thank you for joining us. God bless.